Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, the trade war. So China and US, it seems like they signed a trade deal, but we don't know the detail. I can't find much details, but the fact that Trump didn't make this such a big deal, doesn't that tell us something that he probably didn't get much out of this deal? Can we say that?
It tells us everything. It tells us absolutely everything. My own guess is that the trade deal is essentially what was agreed in Geneva a few weeks
Hmm.
ago. They
Hmm.
decided that they would keep that permanent, and I think that suits China very well. China has won this round, absolutely. I mean, completely. There is no other way to discuss or describe this. Remember how they were saying at one point that it was all a clever the tariffs that they were imposing on all sorts of countries were all a clever way of isolating China in
Uh-huh.
order to force it into massive concessions. Well, what became of all of that? And Trump now wants to go to China and to meet his great friend Xi Jinping.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
quite interesting. But I mean, China won. I mean, there's just no two ways about it.
And in terms of other countries, at one point in April, Peter Navarro, he said that they are going to do 90 deals in 90 days. So we are now in that 90-day period now. I mean, we are at in the 90 days. I don't think they got much deal. I think the latest, according to Lipnick, he said that they're going to top 10 deals. So in that sense, it's not just this trade war against China, but overall, can we say what Trump was trying to do has failed?
Yeah, it was a flop. It was a complete flop. I mean, the one thing he has done is that he's increased tariffs across the board
Mhm.
10%. And, that is something. Now, if he'd just done that and stuck with it, he would have been in a strong position to say, well, I've changed the direction and balance of US
Mhm.
trade policy. What the eventual economic results would have been is another matter, but he would have been able to say, that I've achieved this thing. But of course, he didn't. He went for so called retaliatory tariffs. He did all of that. He talked about all the great trade deals he was going to sign.
Mhm.
uh, we've had one with Britain, which is a nonsense deal. And the most important deal by far is with China, and he won't even tell us what it is. So I mean
Mhm.
that tells you where we really are.
Yeah. Now, of course, other than the deal itself, I think he still or people around him, I don't know, they're still trying to get to China somehow because they report that I just saw that there is some criminal charges against Huawei, and the judge ruled that China must, the Huawei must go to trial because Huawei was trying to get those charges dismissed. Now, part of it is it's supposedly money laundering related to the sanction against the Iran and stuff like that. Now, that actually is part of the reason Meng Wanzhou was kidnapped. Now, after she came back to China, so the expectation is all those charges should be dropped, but apparently not. At least the one judge has saying that the Huawei must have faced criminal charges in the court. So you see, they're still trying. This is the case brought by the Justice Department, which is Trump's Justice Department. And also another
Yeah.
thing is Trump claimed that TikTok has a buyer, but TikTok always had buyers. That's not the problem. The problem is China doesn't approve it. But nonetheless, it seems like they are still trying to do something to hurt China. Don't you think?
Well, absolutely. I don't think that's changed at all. I mean, they tried the economic wall uh, option, but it failed. Um, but they still haven't overcome their visceral hostility to China. I mean, it is still there.
Mhm.
So, they're still hounding TikTok. Sorry, still hounding Huawei.
Okay.
They're still trying to complete the robbery of TikTok because that's what it was. They will do more things.
Mhm.
It's now, I'm afraid, a structural policy within the US. I mean, the things I read about China every day in the media is just, I mean, it's horrifying,
Mhm.
actually. And, the extraordinary thing about it is they pick fights with China, which they then lose. The tariff war was a massive loss. But then instead of learning from that, they just go ahead and pick another fight.
Yeah, yeah. They would never stop. Yeah. And I mean, the main thing, I'm here living in the United States. I really think the most important thing for Trump and for the US government is to focus domestically, right? There is a lot of problem within the US. So the latest one is this big beautiful bill. Some people call it the big billionaire bill because it's almost doing exactly the opposite of what you're supposed to do. On the one hand, they are increased the spending, and the spending is not really benefiting the public, but increased spending on military. And then they cut taxes for the rich, which means lower the income for the government. So you get less money coming in, but you spend more. So clearly, it's going to be a huge deficit for the next 10 years. And it's hurting the most vulnerable. They're cutting Medicaid and Medicare to the degree that lots of Republicans are revolting now. I mean, even though it passed it to the Senate, but the House, there are quite a few Republican members are not happy with it. So you see, that's what this big, beautiful bill is doing. And my question is, why is Trump doing that? Doesn't he know that this is not the best approach? He should know.
Well, you would have thought so. And you would also think that he has some understanding that this is something that his electoral base are not going to like in the end when they understand properly what it means. I suspect the trouble with Trump is that he is, like so many people, especially rich people, a prisoner of conventional Western economic thinking, which is that the way that you increase productivity is by giving rich people more money, because that will motivate them to work harder. And the way you get poor people to increase their productivity is by taking money from them, because that will force them to work harder. I think this is very much the sort of deep down the thinking that he and, as I said, many of the billionaire class, and certainly many of their friends in Britain have.
Well, you see, that's part of the problem with the Western style electoral democracy. So now the Democrats are talking about, of course, the Democrats are very much against this bill, together with some Republicans. And then, of course, the public sentiment is, I think that the number is like more than half of the Americans absolutely disagree with this bill, and even within the Republicans. So it is quite possible the midterm next year that they're going to lose some seats. The Republican Party will lose some seats. But the problem is that even let's say that is the case, that the Republican Party suffered from it. It's already done. The deal is, I think eventually they will still get it, and then the bill is in place. So it's always like the order is wrong, right? That it's already happened, and then you punish somebody saying, okay, we don't like this. And it's always, I also find that in the United States, it's always hard to redo something. Once something, is in place, become a law, it's very hard to cancel it, isn't it?
Well, exactly. I mean, Trump's first term tax cuts were never reversed. I mean, Biden never reversed them. He increased spending, but he didn't reverse them. And it's the same is exactly the same is going to happen here. As you absolutely rightly say, it's now going to become part of the economic and political architecture of the United States. And it's impossible to change anything around it in the United States. I have to say, I had some hopes when Trump became president, but with every week that passes, it seems to me the prospects are getting bleaker. I mean, there are still some good impulses coming out of the administration in a few areas, but when you look at the overall direction, both in foreign and domestic policies, it seems to me that it's just reverting to norms, which is, benefit the rich, tax the poor, hit the poor, take away such social provisions, limited social provisions as the United States has, completely mess up economic policy, completely mess up. I mean, the United States doesn't have economic policies, not really. I mean, it has tax policies to help rich people, and that's really about it. And deregulation is about making a few people in Wall Street even richer. But this is not really a policy in the way that, to go back to the things we were discussing at the start of our program, the Communist Party of China and the government of China has economic policies. You could see that, with the so-called Chips Act, which never produced any chips, and the infrastructure that was going to create all those, points for electric cars, which never built a single one. I mean, you move large sums of money around, but you never sit down and really work out how to make it work. I've just been looking at this. This is Ukraine related thing about increasing production of artillery shells, which they were going to do for the war in Ukraine. Artillery shells have not changed very much since the beginning of the 20th century. So we're talking about amongst the most simple things to make. And they were going to produce 100,000 shells a month, which is a fraction of what Russia is producing. And I'm not even going to start on what China can produce. But they couldn't sort out the factory to do even that. They had to import machine tools from Turkey. They had to import the workers from Turkey. They couldn't get the supply chains running. They couldn't get the steel together. I mean, nothing was organized. So there was a small bump upwards, and now apparently shell production is declining again because there is no means to organize production efficiently for anything in the United States anymore. And can I just say, I mean, whatever criticisms people make of Elon Musk, and you can make many, he is the only person I know in the United States over the last 10 years since Steve Jobs died who has actually managed to produce any industrial products at all, who seems to have any understanding of how to organize manufacturing and industrial chains and those kind of things. And what happens? He's being banished into the outer darkness. I mean, he's not sort of being promoted. I mean, you read every so often, for example, about how the government in China sometimes has its criticisms and has its quarrels with, business people, industrialists, Jack Ma and things like that. Look at what's just been done to Elon Musk. And he is far more central to any possibility of an industrial and manufacturing revival in the United States than any single one businessman is in China. China would never allow one individual to become as important to its industrial structure as Elon Musk has become important to the American. But even then, the Americans are turning against him.
Part of the problem, I find that, just observing, right, that I find that there's too much emphasis on election by itself. So a few years ago, I went to a Democratic Party meeting, local chapter meeting, out of curiosity. So I thought, where I live, the Democrat has a very solid grasp on this area. So they don't really need to worry too much about the local election because it's always Democrats who wins. Yeah. So I thought they would be talking about managing, the problems, the local problems, like there's some roads problems. And of course, there's always the problem like real estate developers developing properties that there's locals that against, or maybe building a Walmart, stuff like that. So it's just like very, very concrete problems we have. So I, as a resident here, I thought I want to listen to what they're thinking. The first we got in there, they're just introducing different people, okay? And then everybody coming and talking about, my name, and then I'm running this is for the next election. I thought that would be like maybe 30 minutes. And after that, we should talk about the real thing. No, they keep on going and going. The whole meeting was about that. There was not a single word talking about local issues. I was really surprised. So
no, I'm not. I've experienced the same exactly in Britain, and I think I've discussed that I'm in contact with Dominic Cummings, who was the campaign person who carried out, played a
The
big role in
Brexit.
Brexit.
Mhm.
And I mean, he's an interesting man, and he talks about how many things are wrong. And he says that one of the problems in Britain, and it's the same in the United States and in the West, is that it's always about process and never about outcome.
Yeah.
And he's absolutely right about that.
Mhm.
And then, and I say this, and I've said, it's not a secret. He won't be annoyed with me because I'm saying this here. Um, the point, my criticism of him is that he's always about process, never about outcome. I mean, he's constantly saying, we need to improve this structure, that structure. We need to have more people that, looking at these, but he never actually comes up with how are we going to actually achieve X or
Mhm.
Y?
Mhm.
How are we going to build up factories to do this, or
Mhm.
how are we going to integrate Britain into sorting out proper internet, for example, which is
Yeah.
such a huge problem here. That sort of topic never gets discussed anywhere in the West anymore. I mean, it's just like we've basically given up doing that. It's
Mhm.
very strange.
Yeah, my mayor, before her election, when I was talking to her about we need a culture center here, for people who have to have a place to do some different crafts or practice, like a choir, children's choir, or, a place for people who can do those kind of a hobby thing. Right now, we don't have one. People just struggle to find the locations to do whatever. And she showed a lot of interest, and there was even an article about it on our local newspaper. After she was elected, I was trying to contact her about that. She did refuse to even meet me. She just,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
so
There is a huge amount of activity in the political systems of the West. There's no action. I mean, the two are not the same. I mean, there is constant activity. But you see this. I worked I've told you, in the legal civil service, in effect, in Britain, and I saw it there too. I
mm,
mean, the number of people who were actually doing something was tiny.
yeah.
I mean, in my office, I was the only person who was doing anything. And I remember counting, I had about 40 people above me who were each sending me different things that they wanted me to do, but wanted reports that they were insisting that I spent all my time, much of my time, simply writing reports, I remember.
Yeah.
But I mean, none of it ever achieved any sort of outcome. And this is how we become.
Mhm. We'll see. I mean, I don't know what to do because they will continue to do that. They're both parties because there was a guy I also met in that meeting on our way out. He used to be a Republican, so he became a Democrat, so he came for the meeting. So I asked him about that. I said, is this the way the Republicans are? He said it's worse. So
Yeah,
what can I
sure.
say?
Well, you see, this is one of the things that again, we let's go back to again our discussion at the start of the program
Yeah.
about the Communist Party of China, which is that it is rooted in society in a way that parties and political movements in the West
Uh-huh.
no longer are. Parties and political movements in the West, as we've discussed many times, have become self-sustaining,
Uh-huh.
independent entities that float above society. The people who are involved in them are involved in them. They are not actually in contact with anyone else beyond that sort of political bubble. Whereas, I'm not going to pretend I'm very familiar with the way in which the system works in China, but I get the sense that people in China, in order to rise, you have to have involvement in factories, in schools, in
Mhm.
offices, in running things in cities, in getting the cities working. So you get that experience of managing people, managing projects, being successful at managing projects, and you gradually build up that experience and the confidence that goes with the experience. And at the same time, that sense of contact and relationship with people, which you can never acquire in the abstract, however well educated and sophisticated a person you might think you are. And I think this is a fundamental difference. One of the things I've noticed, by the way, about the leadership in China is that in the West, we like to go for very, very young people. Whereas in China, this isn't so. They're not enormously old, but they are people with backstories. I mean, they're people who, usually in their 50s and whatever, who've seen a lot and done much, as I said, have worked their way up. And I think that makes for an enormous difference.